He thought the royal guard was just another part of the scenery, something to mock, to bend to his will, all because he was a paying tourist. But when he crossed the line, literally, he never expected the guard's response to leave the entire crowd stunned. What happened next not only silenced his laughter, but turned him into the day's biggest embarrassment. Let's start from the beginning. It was a classic London morning, cloudy, bustling, and humming with the excitement of tourists crowding around Buckingham Palace. At the center of it all stood the Royal Guard, a silent pillar of tradition and discipline. His tall bearskin cap and crimson uniform shone as a timeless symbol of British heritage. He didn't flinch, didn't glance at the chattering crowd. Every muscle in his body screamed one word: duty. But then he arrived. You know the type, loud, overconfident, and practically radiating entitlement. An American tourist wearing a neon green t-shirt that screamed, "London sucks," in bold block letters. Classy. A camera dangled from his neck like a badge of arrogance. And his voice? Oh, you could hear it from Big Ben. "Hey dude, yeah, you, smile or something, will ya? We paid good money to be here." Now, let's pause for a moment. Imagine being part of that crowd, watching this unfold. You'd probably be thinking, seriously? Does this guy think he's the star of some reality show? Well, spoiler alert, he did. The crowd stirred. A few tourists giggled awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to laugh or cringe. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. But the guard? Not a muscle moved. His gaze was fixed somewhere far beyond this petty disruption. Our tourist wasn't having it. Nope, silence wasn't part of the plan. He marched closer, snapping his fingers inches from the guard's face. "Come on, man, give us something. A wink, a smirk? Are you even alive under there?" The nerve. The guard remained steadfast, his unshakable composure practically a superpower at this point. But oh, it gets worse. The tourist's friends, because of course he had an audience, decided to join in. One of them tossed a coin at the guard's feet, as if expecting him to bend down and collect it like a busker on the street. The sound of the coin hitting the pavement echoed louder than it should have, drawing even more attention from the surrounding crowd. And that's when the whispers started. Is he serious? What's wrong with people these days? Does he think the guard's here to entertain him? But our protagonist, the guard, didn't waver. Oh, his fingers might have tensed ever so slightly, and if you looked closely, you might have noticed a flicker of annoyance in his steely gaze. But outwardly, pure stoicism. The American tourist, however, was just warming up. He turned to his friends, laughing like he'd just delivered the punchline of the century. "This guy's like a mannequin. Bet you $10 I can make him crack." Let's just say the crowd wasn't laughing with him. And if you're sitting here thinking, how can someone be this clueless? Congratulations, you're not alone. As the tension grew, the guard remained motionless, his dignity towering over the scene like a fortress. But let's be real. How much longer could this standoff last before something had to give? And oh, believe me, something would give. But not in the way our overconfident tourist expected. If there were an Olympic medal for bad decisions, our American tourist would have clinched the gold right then and there. He stepped forward, planting one sneaker-clad foot over the line, that sacred boundary separating spectators from history. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew the rule: don't cross the line. Yet, here he was, smirking like he'd just unlocked the cheat code to life. "Well, buddy," he called out, "what now? Gonna react, or are you still doing your statue thing?" Let's pause. Imagine being in that crowd. You're thinking, there's no way he's serious. But he is. Oh, he absolutely is. And then, as if crossing the line wasn't audacious enough, he went for the unthinkable. He reached out, fingers hovering near the Givardi's iconic bearskin cap, clearly intent on grabbing it. Time seemed to freeze. The tourists fell silent, their collective breath caught in their throats. Cameras zoomed in, phones were raised higher. This was it, the moment when the immovable object would meet the unstoppable fool. And then, the guard moved. With a single deliberate step, he closed the gap between them, his towering frame suddenly commanding the full attention of the square. His voice, deep and steady as a church bell, rang out. "Step back beyond the line." 3 words. Just 3. But the way he said them, it felt like they carried the weight of centuries. The tourist's smirk faltered. His friends, so eager to egg him on moments ago, were now suspiciously quiet. But our star antagonist wasn't about to back down. Oh no, he couldn't lose face, not in front of his audience. So he laughed, a nervous chuckle that sounded more like a hiccup. "Relax, man. It's just a joke. You're really that uptight?" And that's when it happened. An unexpected twist that shifted the focus entirely. From the corner of the crowd, a small boy no older than 10 stepped forward hesitantly. His face was pale, his eyes wide with worry. He looked utterly lost. The guard's gaze flicked to the boy, and in that instant, the tension broke. The towering sentinel of tradition took a step back, lowering himself to meet the child's eye level. "Are you lost?" he asked gently, his voice a stark contrast to the commanding tone he'd used moments before. The boy nodded, his lips trembling. Without hesitation, the guard extended his hand. "Let's find your parents." The crowd murmured in astonishment. Wasn't he supposed to stay rigid? Wasn't breaking formation forbidden? Yet here he was, guiding the boy through the sea of onlookers to a nearby officer who quickly stepped in to help. And here's the thing, it wasn't just the guard's action that stunned everyone. It was the complete disregard he showed for the mocking tourist, the jeers, the coins on the ground. None of it mattered. What mattered was the boy. As the guard returned to his post, the crowd erupted, not in laughter this time, but in applause. The tourist? He was left standing there, mouth agape, the weight of his actions finally starting to sink in. And you? You're probably thinking, wow, that's what true honor looks like. You wouldn't be wrong. For a moment, the American tourist stood frozen, his bravado wavering. He had come here expecting a show, something he could laugh about later, a story to impress his friends back home. But instead, he found himself at the center of a very different kind of spectacle. The Royal Guard's unexpected humanity had stolen the spotlight, leaving the tourist floundering in its shadow. Still, he wasn't quite ready to give up. With a forced chuckle, he raised his voice, addressing no one in particular, but making sure the crowd could hear him. "Well, guys, looks like he's just trying to skip out on his job. Some tradition, huh?" If he thought this would win back the crowd, he couldn't have been more wrong. "Respect the uniform," a sharp voice cut through the murmurs. Heads turned to find a woman, clutching a toddler in one arm and a phone in the other, glaring daggers at the tourist. Her words seemed to ignite something in the crowd. "Show some respect," came another shout, followed by a ripple of agreement. The tourist hesitated, his smirk faltering as the tide began to turn. A teenager perched on a nearby fountain chimed in, sarcasm dripping from his tone. "Yeah, because clearly centuries of tradition should bow down to you, right?" The tension in the square shifted. What had once been scattered amusement now crystallized into collective disdain, all directed at the tourist. Phones were out, recording every angle, and you could feel the moment slipping away from him second by second. Someone else shouted, "This isn't a theme park, mate." And then the real gut punch landed. A middle-aged woman with a heavy accent and a sharp glare stepped forward, pointing her phone directly at the tourist. "That man," she said, her voice ringing clear above the crowd, "stands for history, discipline, and pride, and you're just a walking embarrassment." Oof. The tourist's face turned a shade that can only be described as tourist lobster red. His friends, who had been laughing along just minutes ago, were suddenly very interested in the cobblestones beneath their feet. Meanwhile, the Royal Guard was back at his post. With a precision that could have been choreographed, he adjusted his bearskin cap, squared his shoulders, and resumed his unflinching stance. His expression was as unreadable as ever, his focus as steady as stone. It was as if the chaos of the past 10 minutes had been nothing more than a brief gust of wind, acknowledged and then forgotten. But for the crowd, it was unforgettable. First, there was silence, a collective pause as the weight of what had just happened settled over them. Then came the applause. It started with a few scattered claps, but quickly grew into something much larger, something heartfelt and thunderous. People cheered, whistled, and even hollered their admiration for the guard. "Now that's a professional," someone called out, and the sentiment spread like wildfire. The tourist, however, had become a pariah. He glanced nervously around the square, the weight of the crowd's judgment pressing down on him. "Let's get out of here," he muttered to his friends, his voice barely audible over the noise. But there was no escaping the consequences. Even as he tried to slink away, he couldn't miss the smartphone still trained on him. Within minutes, footage of his antics and the guard's dignified response would be plastered all over social media. Captions like "respect the guard" and "tourist gets what he deserves" were already inevitable. As the tourist disappeared into the crowd, the square began to settle, though the buzz lingered. People whispered to each other, recounting what they had just witnessed. The guard's actions weren't just professional, they were profoundly human. He had balanced duty and compassion in a way that left everyone in awe. And the guard? He remained steadfast, a sentinel of tradition, utterly indifferent to the noise around him. He didn't need applause or acknowledgement. His pride came from something deeper, something unshakable. For those who had witnessed it, the moment was a reminder of what true strength and honor look like. And for the tourist, well, let's just say his big story didn't quite turn out the way he planned. And you're probably thinking, this is why we need people like him. You wouldn't be wrong.